Hi, everybody. Well, we're here in week 5 of the course to talk again, in a way, about Plato. Now, of course, we've been talking about Plato in a certain way last week as well. We read the Euthyphro, and that is one of Plato's dialogues. So we know a little bit about the dialogue form already, and of course, the character of Socrates, who was historically Plato's teacher. Um, this week, though, we're not so much looking just at Plato writing about Socrates, although that will continue, but we're looking at Plato's own philosophy and how he builds on Socrates' way of thinking to come up with his theory of forms, a distinctive Platonic idea. So let's get into it. So here we have Plato. I know the images for our class are just a lot of statues, and I want to thank Google for those images. All right. So, what is driving Plato? What is his motivation as we turn to the 2 chapters from Guthrie this week, introducing his thought? Well, we're going to follow Guthrie's presentation and supplement it a bit. Plato was interested to pursue Socrates' task, right? He wanted to pick up where Socrates left off, one motivation. And another, and this is relevant especially to the work of his The Republic, which we're going to be reading next week, he wanted to defend and to render worth defending the idea of the city state. All right, so Athens was a city state. There were many city states. Most famously, Sparta was another city state in Greece at this time. This form of government, and especially democracy in Athens, well, Plato was no friend of democracy, but the city state model, it was not obvious that this would survive, right? And it was not obvious that it was leading to the results that everyone wanted to see from it. So Plato, in thinking about the nature of the city in the Republic, is, as Guthrie says here, trying to defend it, right? There are practical considerations. When these philosophers write about things, it's not just they get some idea and it would be fun to write about this thing randomly. No, they're almost always responding to something that's happening that makes the task pressing, right? It's important to remember that for Plato at this time, there really is no distinction between like church state, religion and government. These things are all bound up together. And so everything that we're going to talk about here kind of applies across that boundary. And you'll see some of it gets into the realm of myth, which is why it's useful to note that point from Guthrie. He realized that in order to achieve this goal of defending the city state, of making people see the virtues of this form of government, it needed to happen through a rethinking of people's basic beliefs, because these beliefs were under attack from a few different directions. One is what we've seen, what so-called natural philosophy or physicalism, right? So this pertains to Empedocles, other pluralists, um, earlier philosophers who had emphasized the material nature of the world. And for Plato, this kind of materialism is a threat. A second, from sophistry. And remember, we met the Sophists, right? What was the problem with the Sophists? They're making arguments, but they're not concerned about whether they're true. They're concerned about whether they're convincing, right? And so that is the key distinction. Plato wants to oppose them. And finally, as Guthrie points out here, mystical religions. There were various kinds of cults and mystical or mystery religions from places like Egypt and Persia that were becoming popular in Athens at this time. And their widespread adoption, again, threatened the city-state thing, right? And that is Plato's goal. So he wants to defend the city-state in every way he can and provide a kind of coherent overall picture of reality that can ground people's basic beliefs against these threats. What is at the center of this? Well, we see here on the right a distinction between a world of forms and a world of matter. Two worlds. This is the key to get from Plato. If you get this, you get most of it. All right, so let's unpack this, right? Plato is building on the claims of Socrates. Socrates was not a system builder. He talked to people in public. Plato is a system builder, right? he takes this idea from Socrates, right? That there's a single true nature of justice. What is justice? What is courage? What is piety? Says Socrates, I want to know, tell me the definition. Plato says, okay, if there's a definition of some kind of ideal justice, ideal of piety, there must be something answering to that definition, corresponding to it, right? There should be an ideal of justice, or call it an idea of justice. That's what gets us into this world of forms, sometimes also called the world of ideas. This is behind the phenomena, right? The things that you see, and it's that to which they correspond. As he put it, the soul also was more important than the body, because it is with the soul that we get to actually see, right, the world of forms. With the body, I see a table. With my mind, I'm able to think about that table as one kind of token of a type, one table amidst a countless variety of things that I also recognize as answering to the name table, right? Takes my intellectual faculties in order to discern that, which is why Plato valued them highly, right? In developing this idea, he is combining insights from many of the figures that we have seen so far, from Heraclitus and Parmenides, from Heraclitus getting this notion of the logos, from Parmenides getting this idea that truth is something to be seen with the mind, right? Not only seen with the eyes. And from Pythagoras getting a notion of a larger harmony, as well as some of these religious ideas. Plato maintained, we have a quotation here from Guthrie, that the objects of knowledge, the things which could be defined, did exist, right? But were not to be identified with anything in the perceptible world. Their existence was in an ideal world outside space and time. These are the Platonic ideas, right? Now, when you hear the word idea in English today, Guthrie points this out, he was writing decades ago, you think, it's just a bunch of ideas, right? It's not real. It's just in your head. For Plato, it's the opposite. The idea is real. Idea. Idea. Mispronouncing it, I'm sure. That's real. And the things that you see with your physical eyes are reflections of that. Let's get a different chart up here. I want to thank whomever created this very helpful chart. I hope it does some good here in our presentation. I invite you to pause the presentation at any time on this slide so you can look at this more carefully. And also this slide will be up on our e-learning page so you can refer to it. Plato's conception of forms and things. Remember, we talked about world of forms, world of, we've called it matter. It's also world of things, right? Forms in the realm of being, according to our chart. They are transcendent, eternal, intelligible, archetypal. They correspond to archetypes or kind of, models of things. They are perfect, right? So you have the form of the good, which is the top one, and we'll get to talk about that a bit next time when we talk about the Republic. But you also have a form of a table, form of justice, the form of a cat, right? This is a real world. And in fact, for Plato, this is the real world, and we access it through our minds, right? These forms, down at the bottom of that arrow on the left, are the cause of all things, right? So those things in the realm of being, let's get my fingers in the frame here, things in the realm of being cause things in the realm of becoming, right? The things in the realm of becoming are everything you think of when you think of the word thing, right? Spatio-temporal. They're changeable. They're sensible. You can touch them, see them, smell them, hear them. They're copied, right, from the forms. And to that extent, Plato thinks they are imperfect. So I think of the form of a table. Well, I've got a coffee table, a dining room table, a broken table, big table, small table, all tables, all tables. I can define that idea in my head, right, and follow through with it. But nothing in the material world ever perfectly corresponds with that ideal world. It gets more interesting when you move on to things like justice, right? So you have different kinds of constitutions, different versions of bills of rights. And examples given here of the Nuremberg trials. So, events that happen. And then we can compare those things with our idea of justice, right, that we reach in our mind and determine whether they are just or the extent to which they are just and perhaps strive to make them more so. That's the project of the Republic, which we'll be coming to. And then the form of cat. Well, we have here Gulliver, Kellogg's, and Hoover. Thanks for those lovely names. All of these are cats. They all correspond in some sense to the form. Key takeaway, two world theory, right? Remember this. Here we have a different version of that breakdown. So we have the form of beauty at the top, taking beauty as an example, right? I then, in my head, develop a concept of the form of beauty. So I have my own idea about it. I don't have my own truth, right? There is only one truth, but I have my conception of it and you have your conception of it. And thank goodness we live in a liberal democracy where those conceptions are regarded as equal in dignity. And that's a good thing, right? Freedom of speech. But we don't have different truths. For Plato, there's one truth, different conceptions of it, right? And then we apply that conception to different individual beautiful entities, things in the world. I see them. Is this beautiful or ugly? Is that beautiful or ugly? I can ask myself the question, compare it with my conception of what is beautiful in itself. Last step, imitations of beautiful entities. Pictures, images, movies, music, any kind of representation of something is for Plato kind of doubly, triply, quadruply removed from beauty in itself. Right? The goal is to always kind of train your gaze as clearly as possible on that big B-E-A-U-T-Y at the top. That is the form or idea of beauty. This has ethical implications, and let's touch on those. Plato, as we mentioned earlier, is challenging the Sophists, right? And he's doing this in two ways. One, we just talked about his theory of forms, but he's also talking about the soul. And that's another point that we have to make in our remarks here, right? The soul, Plato thinks, in order to be the best and healthiest soul, needs to be ordered, right? And here we go back to that notion that we saw earlier in the course of the cosmos, where we get the word cosmetics, right? An ordered whole. Taxis has to do with taxonomy, right? So when you organize things into a chart or different categories and species, you'd say that's a taxonomy of the objects that you're studying, right? So in terms of cosmos, an ordered whole, and taxis, putting things in order, this is what Plato thinks we need to have in our soul. Now, the reason why he wants to press on this is the Sophists are denying that this is, achievable. And why would it not be achievable? Because from the Sophist point of view, what you might think is order and what I might think is order is different. Who's to know, right? Maybe your order is better. Maybe my order is better. We can't tell, right? And it doesn't matter. That's what leads the Sophists to a position that would be quite familiar today, skepticism, right? A feeling that we can't know what is true, or at least if we think we do know, we shouldn't say what it is. But for Plato, this is quite a different approach that he takes. The good, he thinks, must be something which always benefits the person or thing in question and never harms him, right? So determining what is good is not just what I happen to think is good in this moment, what you happen to think is good in this moment. Maybe it'll change. My perspective's different from your perspective. For Plato, there is an answer to the question, what is good? And it has to do with knowing, right, the object in question. This is going to get big when we come to Aristotle pretty soon. You have to know the nature of the thing. And for Plato, that means knowing the form, right? If you know the form, then you can determine if this constitution or if this table conforms with it. If it does, it's good. If it doesn't, it's bad, right? Pretty straightforward. what this does is gets rid of the sophist idea, challenges the sophist claim that um, the good should be determined by what you find to be pleasurable. For Plato, pleasure is a passing thing. It's on that very lowest rung of appearance or representation of things. And in order to truly know the good, we have to have knowledge. So we've mentioned the ordering of the soul. What he wants to do is ensure that all the different parts of the soul, and that's what we're coming to, is there are three parts of the soul for Plato. All of those parts are ordered and placed in a kind of harmony, and therefore we achieve proper performance of a function which depends on structure, conceived as the due subordination of the parts to the whole. So if my soul is ordered, I will be able to perceive the good and then make the good manifest in everything that I do because I will know what is good. Okay. What are the parts of the soul? This is the fun part, right? So we get to talk about the charioteer analogy. For Plato, the soul is like a charioteer. So you have the person in the chariot itself. This is the charioteer. And for Plato, this is reason, right? And there are two horses, and he calls these appetite and spiritedness, right? So appetite is, I want another piece of cake. I want another piece of cake, right? Spiritedness is, I'm righteously angry and I am going to stand up for my principles, right? Uh, for Plato, the soul, in order to be well ordered and harmonious and therefore in touch with the good, right, has to have a balance between these three. And reason should not just be one of the horses, it really should be the person in the chariot itself, right? Because reason should be guiding the whole process, but spirit and appetite pull it along, drive it along, right? We have another image of this using different terms, but the same idea. So you have, again, at the image in the top, in the chariot, reason, call it logic, right? And then you have the spirited horse and the appetitive horse. And you have here a table which is going to be useful when we get to the Republic, and we'll put this up again next time. This maps out the different features of each of these parts of the soul. What I want to convey in our spoken remarks here, not to get the lecture to be too long, is simply that there are three parts of the soul and they must be placed in harmony. I encourage you to pause the video and to take a look at this very helpful chart, which again I'm using from an online source. This idea of the soul, for Plato, he's not making really like radical, wild kind of religious claims, what we call metaphysical claims. He doesn't know that there's precisely these three parts ordered in this way. In a certain way, it's a story. It's a story that we tell ourselves, right, in order to understand ourselves. It doesn't matter that it's literally true. It matters that it corresponds with reality in a certain sense. But here we come upon a part of Plato's thinking that I find really important. We read from Guthrie here. Plato reaffirmed the truth of the Pythagorean religious doctrine that the soul belongs in essence to the eternal world and not the transitory. It's the world of ideas and not the world of matter. It had many earthly lives before and between them when out of the body, has glimpses of reality beyond it. But we forget these past lives. The important thing about this idea of reincarnation, of the different parts of the soul, all of these seemingly kind of religious ideas, as we said, that mixes with government and philosophy in Plato's time, becomes clear, I think, if we consider this passage from Guthrie, which I would read for us. We may take it, Guthrie writes, that the existence of the ideas, the immortality of the soul, the view of knowledge as recollection, were all seriously held philosophic doctrines. Plato actually believed this stuff. Beyond that point, Plato thought the human mind could not go by its particular instruments of dialectical thinking. Pause. Dialectical here means dia, or two, and lexis, or word. So it means to go back and forth, like when you're thinking about something. Well, should I do it? maybe I shouldn't do it. Maybe I should do it, right? That could be a dialectical two-word thinking process. These conclusions themselves, Guthrie continues, necessitated the belief in regions of truth into which the methods of dialectical reasoning could not follow. The value of myth is that it provides a way into these regions opened for us by poets and other men of what he calls religious genius. We take account of myth, not because we believe it to be literally true, but as a means of presenting a possible account of truths which we must admit to be too mysterious for exact demonstration. Right? So for Plato, there are certain things that you can know and things that you can, argue about and improve your account of. But then there are certain dimensions of human experience where myth and poetry and symbolism become really important, actually, right? They're not merely made up. They're also not literally exactly true, but they express a deep truth. This represents fairly well the understanding of many Christians today, though not all, about the historical status of a lot of the stories in the Old Testament, and notably, most importantly, the story of creation. Right. So it might not be literally true. It's not completely made up. It expresses a deep truth about what it is concerned to convey. Just a word about Plato's Republic, 'cause we're going to go there next time. That'll be our main reading from Plato. Well, what does he say here? There's a form of everything, and according to that form, once you know it, you're able to tell what it means for that thing to be an excellent thing, right? So every table has a function, put stuff on it, and every table can be better or worse at that function. Right? Three-leg table, if it's a table, not a stool, right? Not so good at that function, therefore not an excellent table. Well, Plato looks at justice in this same way, and he will argue in a way that we'll discuss more next time when we introduce the Republic, that just as the soul has three parts that must be held in balance with each other, so too, in his imagined republic, the city has three parts or three classes of persons who need to be held in balance with one another. So there's an analogy here between the soul and the city. To loop back around to where we began with, this amounts to an answer to the Sophists. Right? Because remember, in ethics, now Plato holds, the controversy between nature and law is brought to an end. For the healthy and natural soul will contain no conflict within it, but will inevitably express itself in acts which are lawful and just. This controversy between nature and law, this was Sophist basically saying, what you say is good is not good by nature. It's just good because, you made up that law, right? You made up that idea for your own purposes. And that led to a conflict. Well, are laws there by nature, or are they just made up by people? Plato regards this as settled through his philosophy. He brings together a metaphysics, which is an account of what is ultimately real in the world, with a theology in the ways we've been talking about relating to myth. And he shows that, in fact, mind is a part of nature itself, right? So if I'm able to see that form of whatever it is I'm considering, that's not just something that I made up, right? That mental act itself is part of nature. It's part of what's out there, right? And therefore, it's a standard to which we can, and Plato thinks, should hold ourselves. That's not simply a product of our own artifice and fabrication. He makes the point in theology, extending this to the question of good and evil, using the different parts of the soul. And again, we'll get to talk a bit more about this next time. Here's the last line that I want to share with you guys, because I know we're about at time. Guthrie has a beautiful passage at the end of his second chapter on Plato, and I'm grateful for this passage. And I hope that we can see amidst, the world of forms and the world of matter, the three parts of the soul, the nature of justice and the republic, all of these things that we've talked about, we can see that there's a certain kind of beauty in what Plato is saying. Not everybody will agree with this, right? But it will become a really influential view. In conclusion, let's consider this passage. Platonism, Guthrie says, is undoubtedly a two-world philosophy, and anyone whose thoughts are confined to this world, world of matter, right, can never hope to understand it. Yet equally, it is a closed book to him who is not alive to earthly beauty, right, which must be to the philosopher as the first rungs of the ladder, which will finally take him all the way from bodily beauty to beauty in his ways. From there to the beauty of scholarship, learning, thinking about things. From there to the wondrous vision of beauty itself, never changing, nor growing, nor diminishing, nor yet beautiful in one part and not in another, but beauty itself, stripped of all fleshly color and mortal dross, and standing out in the immortal radiance in which beauty and truth become one. So you're not going to understand Plato if you are unable to think about a world of ideas. You're a materialist. Oh, if I can't see it with my eyes, I won't think about it. Okay, well, you're not going to get Plato. It's okay. But you're also not going to get Plato if you reject the world, right? Because the world is your point of entry. Let's take this down for a second. The world is your point of entry, right? You start from beautiful things in the world. You develop beautiful ways of being in the world. You move on to beautiful ways of thinking until finally, from experiencing to being to thinking, you are able to contemplate that idea of beauty in itself. And this kind of contemplation is a pinnacle for Plato, also a pinnacle for Aristotle, and it will be an important concept in the remainder of our course. Thank you for your attention. I hope you have learned something about Plato, and I look forward to engaging with all of you in our assignments for the course.